Hello everyone, and welcome to the Town of Princeton budget presentation for the 2022 fiscal year. My name is James Graham. I am the Director of Finance for the Town of Princeton. Today we are going to go over the 2022 to 2026 five-year financial plan, which has passed first and second reading from Council and is now in the public consultation process. We will go over that public consultation process, what you can do to help us finalize the budget, and the processes we've gone through so far, and the processes we'll go through in the future to pass the financial plan. We will review 2021 as a financial plan amendment will be required due to the extraordinary flooding events within the town. We'll review the bylaw itself, including the capital projects therein. We will review the expenses of the municipality. We'll go over how we design the budget and our assumptions that went into designing the budget. And we will review the line items that make up each department in the municipality and a description of what happened in the budget. And then we'll talk revenues, sort of the different revenue sources that we use to pay for the expenses within the municipality. So the public consultation process. This video is part of that public consultation process. You are the public, and you are encouraged to submit comments or questions on the financial plan before it's adopted. So a little bit of review on how we went about creating this budget. So we start a budget usually in the summer of the year before. Typically, I send out requests for comment from department heads in August. Usually capital ideas come out of that. Any additional operational requirements come out of that. And we take all that input, move into September. We introduce what we call strategic planning sessions, where mayor, council, and department heads get together and discuss various capital ideas, how we go about creating different services and different needs of the municipality, if additional staffing is required, if changes to various programs, if we want to drop a program, if we want to create a program, all that gets discussed at strategic planning. Come up with a list of things we want to do for the upcoming year. Finance takes that session, goes and creates a first draft of a financial plan, goes back to council for deliberation with the numbers attached. Usually there's a lot of trimming and cajoling to get that budget into a position that it's balanced. Balanced budget is required by the community charter. Deficit spending is not permitted. So we get it to a position where it has a positive balance when all is said and done. And then it goes in front of council for first and second reading, which is where we stand today. After the first and second reading, we engage the public in a public consultation process. Traditionally, that's been done through a public meeting, some mailers, newspaper mail out, etc. We found that the engagement is kind of lacking in those areas. Last year we created a video like this one to really kind of explain the budget in strong detail, and it was very, very well received. We had over 200 views. We had multiple questions that were forwarded to council, and we found it really engaged the public a lot better than having one or two people show up at a public meeting. So we're going to try it again this year, see what we get, and we'll move forward depending on how the feedback is this year. So again, you are encouraged to present ideas. We list 3 ideas. These are not exclusive, but these are the preferential ways of getting a hold of us. finance@princeton.ca is email, via drop-off at Town Hall, so any written submissions can be forwarded to us. or by phone 250-295-3135. We can't accept submissions to council by phone. It's just too hard to transcribe, I suppose, but we can answer basic questions by phone. So this is a public consultation process. It's not really designed with a lot of Q&A involved. It's more thoughts and questions and comments about how the budget is. This is too high, this is not high enough. That kind of consultation goes to council, and they can deliberate on that. We do ask that submissions be received by March 18th to be put in front of council. Late submissions may or not be accepted based on if we see them and we can respond to them fast enough. But we proceed to third reading if council decides not to modify the budget, which kind of can no longer be amended after that, and then eventual adoption for either late March or early April 2022. We can start the whole process over again in August. So we're going to discuss, we're going to take one step back, and we're going to discuss the 2021 financial plan. So as everyone in our municipality knows, on November 14th, we had a catastrophic flooding event due to the atmospheric river that came from the ocean. The Tulameen River breached its banks in 3 separate places, once at the Public Works Yard, once in front of the Riverside Cabins, and then again closer to the Fenchurch Lift Station. Catastrophic damage to municipal property happened at this point. We have damage to 19 separate municipal vehicles that we have ICBC claims. Some have been able to be repaired. A lot of them are total losses, and the recovery to those vehicles is ongoing. Our Public Works Yard was de facto destroyed. It's very muddy, and the water made a lot of damage to the building itself. There were 3 separate portions of the town diking system that were damaged. We've already explained how that worked. The destruction of the water distribution infrastructure under the Tulameen River. So we had 4 distribution lines along the Tulameen River that were all churned up when the flooding event came through, and they required repair to those before we could distribute water to the north side of the Tulameen River. In addition to that, not only under the Tulameen River, but our water distribution infrastructure was damaged throughout the municipality. About half of our municipality remains under a boil water advisory. And significant damage to the Princeton Senior Center behind the Save On Foods, Community Services building downtown, the splash park beside it, the playground equipment in the park, and potentially water, sewer, and roads infrastructure throughout the town core. And we'll explain this a little bit more when we get into the capital projects. But the water, sewer, and roads infrastructure is a significant potential risk to the municipality as we proceed into spring and things start to melt. So I will do a little sidebar. I don't have a slide per se on financing for an emergency or financing for the flood, but I'll quickly sort of verbally review what happened when it comes to financing and revenues and expenses throughout that. To date, we've spent nearly $2 million on flood recovery within Princeton. That doesn't cover wages. It doesn't cover grants or anything like that. Just subcontractors and materials for flood support in the financial plan. So when we first started, we met in an emergency operations center at Town Hall and responded to the flood within downtown. Anything to do with the initial response to that flooding event the provincial government calls as part of our what they call the municipal response to that flood. Response is within the guidelines of Emergency Management BC and the Emergencies Act, Emergency Program Act, are 100% covered by the province. So in our early days, it involved a lot of, I won't say minutia, but a lot of little things that went into getting ourselves off the ground and the initial response for recovery. So making sure Public Works was supported with vehicles and barricades, and making sure sand was distributed and sandbags were put in place, making sure we did temporary repairs to dikes between atmospheric river events. All that became response, and all that was covered by the provincial government. As we transition to the recovery portion, our sources of funds expands. So, for example, we have right now we've identified 4 separate sources of funds for recovery in our financial plan. So the first one is that response funding. Like I said, we're almost $2 million in, and that is covered 100% by the provincial government. Our second source of fund is insurance. The municipality was covered in our buildings 100% through replacement cost insurance to the Public Works yard, to the community services building. There's damage at the campground that was covered under building insurance. For the pump house and the electrical systems will be covered under the town's building insurance policy. There is the Fenchurch lift station, which was submerged during the flood, and there were electrical and mechanical components in there that were destroyed that will be covered by insurance as well. So that's 100% coverage after we pay our deductible. The deductible for our municipality is $50,000. Part of that will be covered, actually 100% of that will be covered under our third source of funds, which is recovery funds through DFA. But just backtracking a little bit to the insurance portion, the other major insurance portion is vehicle coverage. So as I said before, we have 19 vehicles that were damaged in the flood, and that insurance coverage will pay for depreciated value on those vehicles. It's going to be pretty difficult finding replacements for some of those vehicles in our fleet, like for like. A lot of our Public Works fleet was on the older side. Some of the vehicles date back even to the 70s. So to find replacements of that age will be difficult, to say the least. So we will probably replace those with models that are slightly newer, and that will require some funding to get us up to the top level, and infrastructure costs are covered under, again, our third source of funds, which is recovery funding through EMBC. As many of the flood-impacted residents are aware, we apply under the same program as flood-impacted residents through Disaster Financial Assistance, or DFA, through Emergency Management BC. Our program is slightly different, however, we report to the same people. We have we get covered for infrastructure costs, so that aforementioned splash park, roads, water, sewer, diking are all covered under DFA at 80%, with the first $1,000 being the responsibility of the municipality. Also, deductibles for vehicles and for buildings are also covered under DFA funding at 80%. the last source of funding, and hopefully one that we minimize as much as possible, is municipal funds. We are working diligently to try and minimize impact to taxpayers for the flooding event. It is not easy. The province is researching grants and possible methods of trying to get to have a minimum impact on taxpayers from the flooding event. We continue to work with them, and we really hope that we are able to develop a plan moving forward to make sure that the undue hardship to our municipality is kept to a minimum. I'll give you a little case of how the numbers were looking, and I'm sure many people who follow media, our initial estimates were in the neighborhood of approximately $10 million of DFA funding, which would cover about, which would require the municipality to come up with about $2 million. Our whole tax base for this municipality is about 3.3. So it leads to about a 65% tax levy if collected in 1 year, and even if spread over 5 years, it still represents a 10 to 15% levy per year. Current estimates from our engineer, based on what the river may have done underneath our downtown core, those numbers may be to between 25 to 30 million. And we're talking $5 to $6 million, which just increases the numbers I quoted before, that 65% and the 10 to 15%, nearly threefold. So it is imperative that senior levels of government provide that financial assistance, so we don't have to approach taxpayers with covering those scale of values. We do have some reserves that can offset some of those blows, financial blows, but again, we also don't want to drain every ounce of reserve we have to pay for this disaster as well. So we are working hard. We hope to have some answers as soon as we can on this, and we've approached the financial plan in certain aspects with the assumption that senior levels of government will provide expanded financial assistance. I will also say, if you have any questions on the 2021 financial plan, the public consultation process for the 2021 financial plan will also be simultaneous with this one. So if you have any questions about the 2021 one, please use the same channels as was discussed for the 2022 financial plan. So the 2022 financial plan is a requirement of the community charter. So every year we do have to write a new financial plan. We really try and center on the 2022 financial plan, and commonly called the 2022 budget. So the 22 budget is part and parcel and incorporated into the 22 to 26 financial plan. The rest of the years, 2023 to 2026, are conceptual in nature. So they're based on concepts, they're based on wish lists, they're based on potentials that are coming up in the future, but especially during an election year, very few promises will cross over into 2023 so as not to burden the future council with a lot of plans that the current council has created. Every year a new financial plan is constructed, debated, and designed. So again, that is exactly what I just stated. Every year we go through the strategic planning session, we review what we did last year, we see what worked and what didn't, what we started, what's not a priority. Things drop off, things get added. There's a lot of debate about what the capital and operational budgets look like every year. This presentation will focus on this year's There's nothing stopping us from talking about future designs and requirements and wishes. If should you have any ideas or anything, please come forward and share those ideas with us, and we'd be happy to add them onto our capital plans for future years, or at least debate if they need to be added to future capital plans for future years. So, if you do have questions about individual projects, sources of funds, figures, reserve transfers, they're located in the bylaw. They're located in the budget documents. I won't have the time to go through each individual capital project. I'll do my best, but we will skim through them, so to speak. But any in-depth information, please contact the individual department, and they'd be happy to sit down and discuss what's happening. So how do we structure a budget? So budgets are structured into a capital and an operational budget. So when we think of capital and operational, we usually think of how long the benefit is going to last. So when we talk about a capital budget, it's designed for things that are going to provide a benefit for greater than 1 year. So if we pave a road, that benefit should last 25 to 30 years. If we build a water pipe, that should probably last 75 to 100 years. If we buy a piece of equipment, at least 5 to 10 years. Vehicle, between 10 and 15 years. So the capital budget is designed to provide multi-year benefit to our municipality. The operational budget provides under a year of benefit, and then either has to be replenished or the value is in perpetuity. So utility bills are in the operational budget because they provide benefit for 1 month. If you stop paying the gas bill, it provides benefit for about a month, and the gas company comes and turns off your heat to your facility. So that needs to be replenished in perpetuity. It needs to be replenished every month. Staff wages need to be replenished every 2 weeks. People generally will not come to work if you don't pay them every 2 weeks. Road repair. So we fill a pothole. The benefit may last a long time, but the benefit to the road itself is more a short-term view. Civic celebrations for 1 day, our Canada Day and fireworks shows are all operational because they provide benefit for a very short window of time. So that's sort of how we divide the budget up. So in addition, both the capital and operational budgets are divided by separate departments, so we can identify which managers take the lead on certain projects. It is a small municipality. We all kind of pitch in, but it is handy to have sort of a lead and a department to be able to measure successes and make sure that we know where our budgets are sitting and who's responsible for what. Capital budgets tend to be categorized by project. So each capital project has a budget, it has a objective, and it has a source of funds that are attached to it. We'll review that when we actually review the bylaw, and you'll see how that's all structured. Operational departmental budgets are categorized to fit the needs of the department based on basic cost measurement strategies. We try to measure labor by the department if at all possible, and then the functions become line items for material subcontractors and value transfers from other departments. And you'll see how that's all structured when we go over the budget itself. So this year's capital projects, when we structure the capital projects, we divide them into new projects for 2022 and carry forward projects from 2021 and previous years. So when we build especially larger capital projects, they are often multi-year construction based, or they can be built in phases. The best phased project we can think of in the municipality is a downtown beautification project. One year we do gateways, the other year we do statues, the other year we add to the visitor center. There's future ideas. One year we do a park downtown. One year we do facade improvements. They're all part of the capital budget, but they're done in chunks, little chunks through each year. Those are known as carry forward projects. So if we start a capital project toward the end of 1 year, for operational reasons, or for reasons of the contractor's unavailable, or there's several reasons why a capital project may not get started until toward the end of the building year. But if we do need to carry forward projects, the budgets stand alone. So if we do have a project that starts in 2021, as soon as we pass the 2022 budget, that project is terminated unless we have a new source of funds within the 2022 budget. So those carry forward projects from 2021 get added back into the budget for 2022, and then any new things that we decide to start taking on in 2022 are added as well. So as I said before, the project list is approved by council during strategic planning sessions, and moving forward through the budget process, things will get added and things will get removed. We do try to the maximum extent possible get our capital projects funded through senior levels of government and through user pays, through other sources of local government funding, UBCM, through our partner at the regional district, before our tax revenue is used. The current tax rate policy we'll review is Schedule A, pointing a couple of highlights. The last tax rate, last tax policy review was done in 2019. Typically we do them in the budgeting process after a council is elected. This is a council election year, so we will review the current tax rate policy in 2023, and if there's any updates, then we will proceed with making them for next year's financial plan. The capital budget is detailed in Schedule C. We'll review that when we review the bylaw. So capital projects are only performed if the source of funds are available, and there's several projects we will see when we come to the capital plan that are listed but are awaiting a source of funds. If the source of funds are approved through the year, then the project can proceed. If they aren't, then they'll either be carried forward to 2023 or removed. So our aquatic center, we were hoping for a grant that was approved from infrastructure funding through the province. It was not approved, so it has been removed from the financial plan for 2023, pending a new grant application. So it will reappear when we have a date for the new intake for a aquatic center. The operational budget. So when we design the operational budget, the budget is designed to increase 3% for all functions of that department, so labor, materials, and subcontractors. If we've noticed significant increases that push that 3% for individual line items, or if we are in danger of going over that 3%, We've noted there's not a lot. There are a couple that we will review when we go over the expenses, but we really try and make sure that we maintain no more than that 3% increase. This is a new discussion for this year, and why I italicized it. But the CPI at the end of 2021, as most people are aware, if they go to the grocery store or if they have seen any news articles in the last couple of months, inflation is starting to creep back into our vocabulary again. It's 3.4% at the end of 2021, and the early indications from 2022 that it is higher than even that. The 3% assumption is starting to look weak. Most likely for the next financial plan, I will have to come up with a different number than 3% that will be higher. So with that larger inflationary expectation, next year's council will actually have to decide whether we are going to pare back services or we'll need to collect more funds on the other side so that we can maintain the same things that we enjoy today. If there are any unspent amounts from any line items at the end of the year, those are reserved for future years, and we'll review sort of what reserves look like and how they are structured when we get to that portion of the financial plan. If we go over our expenditure budget significantly, so that we go into a deficit position, this has to be corrected in future years or taken out of reserves. And we really do try not to make that a habit around here. We don't plan for it. There are certain emergency situations where that would be required, but it has not historically happened in this municipality. So now we get into the meat and potatoes of our presentation today, which is the financial plan itself. So the bylaw is 20 pages long. It's in-depth. It's quite complex in certain locations. I'll do our best to guide everyone through it, and hopefully we can explore some of the capital projects and some of the methodologies that we use when we interpret this bylaw. So the first year, or the first page of this of the financial plan is essentially the face of every bylaw. Sort of lays out what it is, what the schedules comprise of, and it repeals last year's bylaw. Remember, each budget stands on its own, so when we pass the 2022 bylaw, the 2021 bylaw will be repealed. So once we get full adoption and everything, the mayor and this chief administrative officer will sign the bottom of the financial plan to bring it into adoption. Schedule A is our tax rate policy. Our last tax rate policy was decided upon in 2019. Again, with the adoption of the current council. This is an election year, so we will probably review this policy during the next budget cycle. I won't read the entire bylaw or the entire policy. It is on our website under the current financial plan and will be in the future financial plan. So please do have a read over it. It is designed to keep residential property rates competitive, specifically with the same municipalities in our region. It is designed to make Princeton an attractive municipality in which to do business, and also encourages us to save for future possible future emergencies or for reserves for future services. In addition to that, so yeah, please feel free to have a read. It details our attempts to structure our capital plan based on grants primarily, and to minimize taxation used for capital purposes, and also encourages user pay services for things where there's an obvious end user of services, such as water, sewer, and things like our municipal campground, our arena, our user pay services that you would commonly think of, landfill, of that nature. Schedule B is our kind of our meat and potatoes of our financial plan. What we call our consolidated budget. The numbers in 2022 are significantly higher than in previous years or in future years. Most of that is planned flood mitigation. You'll notice our capital plan for 2022 is almost $32 million, whereas in most years it varies between 3 to 6. We are hopeful and a little bit fearful, but mostly hopeful that we don't have several frozen damage under our municipality that will require large amounts of money to fix quickly. But it's in our financial plan just in case. If you take a look at the proportions, you'll notice that in 2022, see if I can highlight this. In 2022, our capital plan, $32 million, goes to 6, goes to 6, goes to 3, goes to 2. Again, we're most certain about 2022 and least certain about 2026. So that's where, not that we're planning on spending only $3 million in 2026, but for right now, the concepts we estimate will only cost about $3 million at this point. But there'll be added things as we get closer to that time frame. When we look at the 31 versus 66332, we also take a look and see where those funds are being derived from. If we notice up here, our provincial and federal grants are listed at $25 million for 2022, and then down to its more typical $3 and $4 million in the future. Obviously, we're requiring senior levels of government to step up to fulfill the entire capital plan. It's also important to note that when it comes to the capital plan, we often will put every possible capital plan that we wish to accomplish in that current fiscal year. It doesn't come to pass. So if all the federal and provincial grants were approved, we could proceed with the capital plan in its entirety, subject to availability of contractors, availability of materials, and it's not very practical to complete the entire capital plan in 1 year. So some of that will be carried forward and some of that will be canceled in future years. But we always do hope that the whole capital plan could be executed. The operational plan, which is located in the rest of the budget, all these numbers here, we can't really see that very well, let's try a different color. All these here are operational in nature, and you notice that the majority of them are much more consistent based on inflationary pressures and not much else. The one exception to that this year is discretionary grants, and largely the discretionary grant portion is the flood relief grants. We received those from the Community Foundation of the South Okanagan-Similkameen and distribute them to residents that were impacted under an evacuation order, but they are still expenses from the municipality and received by the municipality as a grant. So it still has to be expended, and that's where that kind of gets derived from. It's a 1 year thing, and then we go back to our usual $45,000 for discretionary grants. We'll also notice down here, I'm running out of colors, but pick one more here, flood mitigation. So for 1 year, we have a flood mitigation budget of $2.1 million for response and recovery efforts. We're hoping not to have one in future years, but again, the budget is an annualized thing. So if we do find that we have needs for more flood mitigation into the future, these numbers can be adjusted accordingly if we need to. Over here, our net change of reserve funds is also in the bylaw. Essentially, this will tell if a budget is being reduced or added to through the course of the year. If the number is positive, for example, in the future amenity reserve here, if a number is being added to, that means we are planning on putting more money than we're taking away into the reserve. If the number is negative, for example, in the capital works reserve, that means we are drawing more money than we are putting back into it. So when we take a look at all these reserves here, and actually these two reserves here, are all for capital purposes. Typically, reserve funds can only be used for capital purposes. They cannot be used for operational expenditures. The one major the exception to that was during the COVID pandemic. The province did come out with an emergency order to allow operational uses of reserve funds, but that was a 1-year thing that's expired. So we're back to normal community charter rules, which basically state that that reserve funds have to be used for capital purposes. A new reserve fund you'll note here is the development cost charge reserve. So the municipality is in the process of implementing development cost charges. That $500,000 estimate comes from the consultant that built the development cost charge in response to what would normally be seen in our municipality. And that's how much we expect to collect. Development cost charges, again, can only be used for capital purposes, and they help supplement existing repairs to infrastructure that benefit new construction, or they also can be used to facilitate new water, sewer, parks, and roads in areas that are not currently served by them for the purposes of development. Unrestricted surplus right here is what is left over at the end of the day. We're expecting a surplus of $18,000 out of a budget of $42 million. So the change in reserve funds are there at $246. The difference between $42,168 and $41,992 and $992 or $922 is $246. So the difference in a nonprofit operation is always zero. We have no profit, we have no loss. The second part of Schedule B, and this is required under the community charter, is our planned sources of revenue and our planned distribution of municipal taxation. You'll notice this year the budget is nearly 60% government grants, and that is important to note that we are, especially for the capital plan, the government grant percentage is enormous. In most years, the government grant is much more tame, but we are planning several capital works through Emergency Management BC that will skew this entire chart to the tune that municipal tax revenue is only providing 8.3% of total revenue. Typically, that number is usually 30 to 40%. Planned distribution of municipal taxation is here. Basically states by percentage and by dollar value sort of what each property class contributes to municipal taxation annually. These tend to stay consistent from year to year. We do monitor the percentage so that no one class is heavily weighted over any other class. So the highest class is drawn from heavy industry, which you have to think of sort of the mine and the mill at 39.3%, but the majority of it comes from both these two categories, taxation and heavy industry, which contribute over 75% of our tax base to the municipality. And yeah, again, we monitor that for skew every year. Right now, that's a pretty good balance. There are several municipalities where heavy industry tends to take over 70 to 80% of the total property taxation, and that's unsustainable, especially in some of the northern communities where that number, if that is 60 to 70%, and the major employer in town has a disruption of services, that can mean peril for the municipality itself. So we tend to balance it. If it becomes skewed, we will have a look. So we're on to capital expenditures. We start off with a note in the capital expenditures. This basically says that our capital budget is a line item that's in the Schedule B. So we plan on spending $32 million in capital projects. And how this allows us in the purchasing policy is that should we have a project or a capital project with a source of funds that is secured, and we have another capital project that also has funding that's secured, but perhaps may be in danger of going over budget or must cease, we can transfer funds between two capital projects in a limited space to be able to fulfill one capital project over another. However, if it exceeds the total maximum of the category itself, or the sources of funds are exhausted in total, we must go back and modify the capital budget, which requires a financial plan amendment. So, without further ado, here are our capital budget items for 2022. You'll notice that our capital budget has several different aspects to it. The first one is the maximum amount of expenditure. That essentially states, make that dot a little bit bigger, draw your eye to it, there we go. So that's the maximum amount of expenditure for this capital plan is $250,000. To exceed that would require drawing from another capital project at the discretion of financial staff and the Chief Administrative Officer, and if there were no other source of funds available, would require a financial plan amendment through council. It displays a department. So this one would be overseen by Recreation and Leisure Services, because that's where the that's where the operational plan sits. The campground is in Recreation and Leisure Services. It describes an object. So each capital plan has an object. Capital plans are often very narrow in scope, so we can't spend willy-nilly on capital projects. This one is to install new washroom facilities. There we go. Look at that. So yeah, this one is to install new washroom facilities. Obviously, if we didn't have an object there and we called it campground capital improvements, the manager in charge could install anything he wanted at the campground. He could install a carnival wheel. He could do just about anything. This is only to install new washroom facilities at the campground. And then each capital project also has a source of funds. So some sources of funds are already done, already achieved. So if it's a reserve or it's a grant that has been approved, the source of funding will allow the capital project to continue. Some are contingent sources of funds. So the grant is applied for, and if it's approved, then you can carry on with the capital project. We do not remove them from the capital project, but they cannot start until that source of funds is secured. So when it comes to the capital, so when it comes to the campground, probably the best way of putting it. Oh, that's interesting. I'm discovering this program as I do this presentation. It's kind of neat. So. So when it comes to the campground itself, I'll kind of review each capital project in a little bit of detail to kind of give you the where every project sits at this point. So the campground improvements, we already do have a federal accessibility grant that has been approved, and a second grant has just come down the pipe within the last couple of days for the campground. So this project can proceed on 100% grant funding. So, and so this project pretty much has a green light pending adoption of the financial plan by council, and that should probably move forward in 2022. Bridge Street Park. I'll turn on this laser pointer thing. Let's see if I can get a nice color here. Oh, that's kind of small. Okay, so this is the one I have to go on. So. And clicking doesn't help, so I'll just move the pointer over and sort of draw your eye to where we're talking about next. So, Bridge Street Park. So we're putting in a public park space on Bridge Street at the old Overweighty site. The funding sources for that are the Parkland Reserve and the Future Amenity Reserve. So both those reserves are already sufficiently funded to proceed with that project. A caboose reimbursement or refurbishment, I beg your pardon, for a maximum of $30,000 to repair and renovate the historic train caboose on the Kettle Valley Railroad Trail next to Burton Avenue. The source of that funding, when it says general taxation, that means it's coming from there is no specific source of funding. It will just come from the general reserve that's collected through general taxation. So that's what that phrase means. But general taxation projects, as I said, we keep to a minimum, but they are approved out of hand because we are assured of funding through the taxation system. Memorial Park concession roof to a maximum of $50,000. So that's to replace the roof over the concession area at the Ball Diamonds at Memorial Park. So the source of this funding is a capital grant from the regional district. They cost share our recreation facilities with us. And if there is any remainder, it'll come from general taxation. Princeton District Arena Improvement Project. So we have a capital project that will be designed to replace the roof at the arena. The roof has reached the end of its functional life. This will replace that roof. It will install solar panels on the roof to generate electricity to power the building. It'll pay for a new ice resurfacing machine that is based on electricity, and an ice edging machine that's also electrical, and to install new dehumidification machinery. The current one in the arena is non-functioning. So the sources of funding, we have a federal infrastructure grant pending on this project for approximately 75% of the entirety of the project, so about $750,000. The regional district will contribute a portion of the funding as per our cost-sharing agreement for recreation. We have an arena reserve that was earmarked to assist in rebuilding the roof. And there is general taxation in there, but the actual amount of general taxation that we required for this project is probably in the low five figures. We're probably talking $10,000 to $20,000 as sort of any stopgap that's kind of left over at the end of the day. So the federal grant has not been approved or denied yet. It's still pending. So this project cannot proceed until the sources of funding are secured. A pickleball court. So this is to fund the construction of a pickleball facility at Memorial Park in partnership with the Princeton Pickleball Association and the Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen. The source of funding for this project, the $25,000 comes out of general taxation. The Pickleball Association is proceeding to find a grant to build their facility. There's a cost-sharing aspect to that, so the regional district and the municipality have each pledged $25,000 to that facility. Public Works equipment. Last year, Public Works asked for a skid steer piece of equipment. We've been renting them one for the time being. They would like to purchase the one they have so that they can use it appropriately. They ended up buying a lawn tractor instead, as they couldn't find parts for the previous lawn tractor that they had at the Public Works yard. This project will also purchase a new plow truck. The plow truck dates back to, I believe, the 70s. It might be the 80s, but it's getting to be several decades old, and finding parts to be able to repair it are becoming more and more difficult. So a plow truck will be required, and a new front end loader. So the source of this funding right now is short-term borrowing through the Municipal Finance Authority Equipment Purchasing Program. So you can basically think of that short-term funding as a 5-year car loan. So if we purchase these pieces of equipment, the Municipal Finance Authority, who are required to go through for long-term borrowing and is highly encouraged for us to go through for short-term borrowing, would lend us this money. Right now, their short-term borrowing rate is at 0.92%. So a very good interest rate, and that's how we would fund that program. Slope stability study. We've done this already. Our slope stability came back identifying several areas of the municipality that the cliff sides above the roads are deteriorating and are in need of some mitigating work. So the amount of funding in there is not necessarily for a study. It is to actually make repairs to the slope above Vernon Avenue to prevent slope degradation to the road face below. And that's done through infrastructure grant funding. So there is actual funding available for repairing that hillside. Our next page of capital projects, airport lighting. This one is an example of a grant that we've received that will probably be insufficient to complete the airport lighting project. We're going back to the province to seek guidance and to see what they want to do with this project. The municipality would really like to see it to its completion. However, the funding is just not available at this point. So we will provide further updates when we receive them. However, this project is probably on hold until we find a secure source of funding for it. Airport fuel system for $40,000. We need to replace the fuel distribution system at the Princeton Airport. The current system dates back to the early 2000s. It is currently a swipe dial-up system to get fuel from the airport, and it's obviously antiquated technology. I haven't seen a dial-up system for a debit card or a credit card for quite some time. It doesn't actually take debit cards; it only takes credit cards. So this should upgrade that fuel system so that it meets current standards. It'll work on a cellular signal or a broadband signal, and would be able to take debit cards in addition to credit cards for fuel. So the source of funding, we do have an airport reserve that would be used to have the airport fuel system in operation. Second Bench Hillside Trail. That has a $50,000 budget attached to it. So to rebuild the stairs and pathway that connects the two parts of Fenchurch Avenue between the second and third bench residential areas. This is a carry forward project and should nearly be complete. Hopefully that's done for 2022. So we're on to more public works type projects now. So this is for obsolete and defective valves within the town water system. The Public Works Department has identified some critical deficiencies in our valves that could cause damage or make repairs difficult. So we need to have those replaced. There's a water reserve for that. Confined space study. WorkSafe is big on the confined space study for us. In our water system, we have several areas that are confined spaces. So that study is in our budget, also covered from the water reserve. Fire hydrant replacement. So many of our fire hydrants, we don't really see it, but they do leak. They're getting quite old, and to find parts for them is becoming more and more difficult. So this replaces the fire hydrant to current fire standards, and that replacement is done through the taxation portion of our budget. Ponderosa lift station generator. So it supplies and installs a emergency generator at the Ponderosa lift station, preventing possible backflow issues. So we do want the sewage from the third bench area to flow down toward the sewer lagoons and not go the other way, for obvious reasons. So there's a little bit of a dip and a lull that the sewage has to go through before it lifts back over and heads towards second bench. And in the event of an elongated power supply issue, we do have risk of backflow issues with the sewer. So this generator would kick in and solve that problem and continue pumping the sewage toward our sewer lagoons as opposed to going the other direction. We do have a sewer reserve for this project, so that will cover that. Security upgrades at well 4. Well 4 is the well that is next to the KVR Trail, just beside the Tulameen River. We have had some security issues. Public Works has requested funding to install security measures, cameras, fencing at the well to discourage theft and vandalism. Storm system study. So we have our sewer system that operates at, especially during the freshet, at a very, very large rate of flow. And we've already done a study on our sewage system that actually proves that we have a large component of water in our sewer system, which is not usually conducive with sewage systems. It's usually mostly sewage as opposed to sewage and water. So obviously there's a certain component of sewage that is water, but ours is much more of a component. Water is much more of a component of the storm sewer. So we need to find sort of the deficiencies in the system and plan for major repairs, and that's done through, there's an infrastructure grant for that storm sewer study. So they will proceed with that when the source of funding is secured. Sanitary sewer investigation is again this is specifically downtown. To investigate infiltration of stormwater from leaks and non-compliant. Okay, so this is more $25,000 to have investigate residences to figure out. There's a lot of stormwater that people hook up and put their stormwater directly into the sewer system, which is against town bylaws. For obvious reasons, it causes much more of a strain on the sewage system, especially at Frechette. So that project is designed to investigate those reasons and start a public awareness campaign to mitigate that. A shoring cage. So for excavating works, this is a safety issue. Provides a safe place to prevent debris from falling on workers during excavation projects. Valve exerciser. So this are existing valves. Some of them are deficient and require replacing, but as part of the general maintenance of the water system, our valves need to be essentially twisted this way and that way so they don't seize. So they go off and on and off and on and off and on. And this is a general maintenance component. This piece of machinery will do this automatically, saving time of public works and saving their arms from having to turn the thing manually off and on and off and on and off and on. It saves time at the gym, but honestly, they want to do things as efficiently as possible. More of our projects, industrial park expansion. So this will install paving and systems to allow 5 more folios at the industrial park. Our industrial park is sold out, and the demand for industrial land for employers is still strong. So this will install 5 more and complete the current phase of that industrial park in preparation for the next phase of the industrial park, which will be coming in future years. It's important to note that the source of funding for this one is also Industrial Park Reserve, which is from previous sales in the industrial park, and land sales reserve from sales of the industrial park. So no taxation money in this project. Obviously, we don't want taxation money going to pay for development. So this is all from previous land sales. Rockland Avenue and Highway 3. $50,000 to make safety improvements to that intersection. That would be the intersection it's west technically, I suppose, from a highway standpoint, due west of the Princeton Bottle Depot. There's some safety concerns on that intersection. This would allow us to make that road safer at the connection. Pump house air conditioning system. So there's a couple of projects on this list that had to do with the heat dome that moved in 2021. We actually had situations where the pumps, it was so hot that the pumps were beginning to overheat and fail, causing water shortage issues. As we all know, during that event, we had significant water restrictions, and we hope to mitigate those if there are any future events. So This will prevent overheating of town well water pumps, $30,000 for air conditioning systems for our pump houses, and the water reserve will be a source of funding for that. SCADA. So SCADA is a monitoring system for our town water system. So water operators can see what's happening remotely and at a moment's notice to identify problems before they happen. This will supply and install a new monitoring system. There's an infrastructure grant for this project. However, there's also insurance money. As the town public works facility was destroyed, the SCADA system, also a large portion of that was destroyed in the flood as well. So some of that may be covered with insurance. You'll see there's another project, as we discuss later, that will also help with SCADA investment. Okay, so now we're moving on to projects that are part of our $7 million AAP project that we proposed to the municipality last year. There are a number of projects on here that kind of fit into that. So we will review those as well. The first one on the list, the culverts and lift station, located near the Pines Trailer Park and Memorial Park. This will supply and install a new design, including building and mechanical parts at the culverts and lift station. As the current culverts and lift station the design is a little bit cumbersome to work in, and it starts to violate work-safe confined space requirements. So this will provide a modern design for that facility, and that's designed to be happening through the infrastructure project. Smoke machine. So what this does, again, this fits in with our infiltration problem with our sewer system. So essentially, the Public Works Department can inject smoke into the sewer system and actually detect cracks in a sewer pipe to make sure that so that we know where to repair if we do have holes and deficiencies. Hull liquid waste pit. So currently the town of Princeton maintains 3 liquid waste pits located right beside the golf course on the east side of the town. This would construct a 4th one. The regional district is growing, and the regional district takes their liquid waste by truck. There are several companies in the municipality that do this. Pump out septic tanks, outhouses, and such, and deposit it at our liquid waste pit. This would add a 4th one for future expansion, and is 100% covered by the regional district. They pay for the capital costs. We pay to upkeep it and charge fees for dumping dumping waste at our liquid waste pit. Manhole replacement. So several of our manholes are starting to warp, crack with age. They are several decades old and have been identified for replacement. Video inspection system. So this will supply a closed circuit television system to be installed to inspect cracks in our water system. Landfill scale software. Our current landfill scale software is deficient. It is approximately 15 to 20 years old, and this would provide funding for new software that would replace it and improve operations at the landfill. Well monitoring. This has been pushed strongly by Interior Health. They are concerned about infiltration into both our wells at Memorial Park and at the site next to the Tulameen River. This would install sensors to monitor groundwater pollution, at the Princeton landfill. Oh, I beg your pardon. Nope, I didn't get that one right. So this is to install, to monitor pollution at the landfill, so leaching into the ground. It's an Interior Health and a Ministry of Environment requirement, and that would be covered under a water reserve, as the infiltration may impact our wells, as the landfill is located basically directly above the Memorial Park draws for water. Park refurbishments and upgrades. So basically this $25,000, as was so eloquently put by our Chief Administrative Officer Lyle Thomas, to refurbish one park a year. So pick a park and upgrade it. So replace the playgrounds, fencing, pavement, grass, landscaping at sort of one park a year to improve each park, and to slowly upgrade some fairly antiquated playground equipment in each one of those parks. A paving program. So we're doing something a little bit different with the paving program this year. Typically we have picked several streets that needed refurbishment of the top layer, and repaved those streets. This year, because we've had double gas tax funding for 2 or 3 years, and we've actually made great progress in funding our arterial streets and roads. We're going to this year concentrate on sidewalks within town boundaries. So repair of sidewalks will be the attention of Public Works this year. We have the federal gas tax funding for this year, and any reserves from previous years for that paving program. Public Works will decide which. They've earmarked several sidewalks this year for repair, and they will release that when they have that program finalized. Memorial Park again. This will study the layout as we transition from hopefully one day an outdoor to an indoor facility for the pool, and pickleball starts to use Memorial Park, and the ball diamonds start to age. This will determine sort of how Memorial Park will look in the future. So now we're on to flood replacements. This budget was actually prepared using the conventional schedule for budget purposes, starting in August, and we actually prepared first and second reading as a finance department. Prepared first and second reading for the municipal budget on November 15th. So this presentation is about 3 months behind, and I apologize for that. We've had a lot of flooding issues to deal with, and grant distribution and things to kind of work through, in addition to creating the largest capital plan that Princeton has ever seen, and essentially rewriting all that after the flooding event the day before we were supposed to go to first, second reading. So we had to pull the budget off the table and rewrite it and represent it. So that's a fairly large effort. These next capital plans are all flood related and directly relate to where the flooding will be spent. So my apologies, but we're still well within our statutory deadlines. We have to have a budget passed by May 15th. So we still have time, 2.5 months, to make sure this thing gets approved. So vehicle replacements, $650,000 to replace vehicles that were damaged in the Tulameen River flooding event. The source of funding, insurance proceeds, EMBC, and again, we need to find a place for after the recovery. Funding is only 80%, so the other 20% probably out of the Capital Works Reserve Fund. We're hoping that that EMBC will cover 100% of it, and the capital, reserve funds can be preserved for future years. However, we'll see. The province may not share in our enthusiasm for that idea. So we will provide updates on how that's going, and hopefully we can provide positive news on that front. Building repair and replacement. So the public works yard, as I said before, was destroyed. This will replace or repair the public works yard and the community services building, which was substantially impacted as well. The source of that funding is 100% insurance. Our deductible will be covered through EMBC, and the extra $10,000 is an operational expense. So we should be able to provide more details on this one in the very near future. We're working on that right now. Repairs to the Fenchurch lift station. So again, the Fenchurch lift station was submerged during the flooding event. So this budget is to repair electrical components and perform a upgrade to bring this site to current electrical standards. So right now, again, the Fenchurch lift station, the machinery, and the electrical are all in one building. Current design aspects are to have most of the electrical components in a side kiosk, and the mechanical parts inside the actual lift station. This meets WorkSafe requirements for confined spaces, and it also meets current electrical guidelines. So the source of this funding, insurance proceeds, should be able to be sufficient to completely repair the building, but there may also be some EMBC funding that's necessary if they don't cover the whole thing, specifically relating to the machinery inside. Well system disinfection and repair. So as we all know, anyone who's being serviced by wells 1 and 2, the Memorial Park wells are still under a boil water advisory. So we continue to investigate infiltration and disinfect the wells to interior health satisfaction. And as soon as we can get there, then hopefully we can release the boil water advisory. That's our goal. So again, we seek funding through EMBC as part of the flood, and if necessary, the water reserve to supplement their funding for the 20%. Diking system repairs, $1 million to complete repairs of the diking system that was damaged during the flooding event. Obviously, there's a lot of dike at the public works yard, at the cabins, and at the Fenchurch station that was destroyed and rebuilt. There's still more work to be done to the slope above the public works yard, and to make that dike up to a permanent standard. So we're hoping Emergency Management BC will cover this as part of the response and cover 100% of it. The efforts are ongoing in that area. Directional drilling. So this repairs the water lines underneath the Tulameen River that were churned up and destroyed in our flooding event that we mentioned earlier in this presentation. A large portion of their job is done, and the other line should be completed early this year. That'll be done through Emergency Management BC and supplemented through the Water Reserve Fund for funding for this project. SCADA replacement. So part of the Public Works Yard contained our SCADA system. Again, we mentioned this earlier in the schedule presentation that we were looking at replacing SCADA anyway because it was insufficient for our needs. This would replace the SCADA portions that were destroyed in the Public Works Yard during the flooding event. So this will be through our EMBC grant, Water Reserve Fund. So between the two projects, hopefully we can reduce the overall expenditure when we combine both projects together and come in significantly under budget, and work to keep our costs down. Road, water, and sewer replacement. So this was identified by our engineers after the flooding event on November 14th. After our flooding event, very soon after, we had freezing temperatures move in, -10, -15, and really haven't let up all the way through winter. As the ground begins to thaw, the water, obviously, there's water tables underneath rivers and beside rivers, and the force of the Tulameen River would have flowed through those water tables and possibly damaged water and sewer infrastructure underneath roads. So if we do have water and sewer issues as everything melts, we were required to dig up pavement and replace water and sewer. And that $14 million estimate is to estimate if all the water and sewer needed to be replaced within our downtown core, the $14 million would have definitely be a good first step toward repairing all that damage. We would rely on Emergency Management BC to kick in 100% of the funding for that. Again, 20% of $14 million, we're looking at nearly $3 million, which is our entire tax base for 1 year. It is impractical for the provincial government to expect us to pony up for $3 million of water, sewer, and road replacement spontaneously. So we're hoping they come through. We're waiting on word from the provincial government, and we will keep residents posted on that portion of our budget. Sewer force main lining, that is in our $7 million major water and sewer upgrade project. That lines the sewage force main from the lift station to the sewage lagoons. Those lines were partially damaged in the flooding event, so we would pursue EMBC to cover the portion underneath the Similkameen River. And the $7 million project would cover from the bank of the, I guess that would be the east bank of the river to our sewer lagoons. Sewer trunk main replacement. So this is the meat and potatoes of the $7 million project, and that's to replace the trunk line that goes under the Tulameen River through the downtown area to the Fenchurch lift station. So that's along Angela and Lime Streets in downtown Princeton. This would replace the trunk line with a larger one up to current standards. Right now, the line in that is deficient for the number of homes we have on the north side, and possibly could fail. So we want to make sure this is replaced as soon as possible to remove that threat. And the source of fundings is that $7 million project. Well construction. We are in the process of identifying a new location for a new well, and according to interior health guidelines, we also have to design disinfection systems for a new well construction and fund the ability to get that water into the current water system, or to install it into the water system we have now. So the source of that funding is the $7 million project as well. There is other well information over here. I'll review that as well. So in addition to rebuilding or installing a new well, because of the difficulties we're having in disinfecting the wells at Memorial Park, should interior health require us to put in additional filtration systems or upgrade the wells we have now, they'd be very difficult due to the design of the wells was insufficient for expansion or for a significant treatment system to be installed at those wells. So we also have $4 million of EMBC funding to decommission those wells and move them to a portion of the municipality where they would be unaffected by the river to a certain extent. Obviously, all water tables in this municipality are to a certain extent decided by the river. We have 2 rivers in the municipality, but those ones are particularly susceptible to groundwater penetration, according to Interior Health. So those that is in the budget. Hopefully, it's a capital project we don't have to undertake, but if we do, that is there as well. So moving right along, the booster station at Warren and Billiter. The current booster station at Warren and Billiter has been inoperative for a fairly significant length of time. It's underground and it is actually constantly flooded, providing a electricity or a electrocution risk for employees that work in that facility. It is dangerous and needs immediate replacement. So that booster station will be moved above ground to a building located on Warren Street, and that is part of the $7 million project. A master plan for infrastructure. So we will ask our engineering firm to give us a master plan that will give us maintenance and replacement needs up to the next 25 years. So we have a long-term capital plan moving forward. Angela Avenue Sewer Lift Station. So in addition to the trunk line being deficient for its extension, the engineers have also identified a pinch point at Angela Avenue that because of the topography of the Allison Flats area, it can be susceptible to sewer backups. A lift station would assist gravity in getting this sewage into the trunk main underneath the Tulameen River and off to our sewer lagoons. So this would design and construct a new sewer lift station to facilitate that new trunk line. Borrowed funds would also, this is part of the $7 million project, the major sewer and water upgrade for this project. The last 2 projects here are fire department. So the fire department equipment and fire hall roof replacement are both carry forward projects from 2021. The roof replacement project did not get completed as the proponent that was chosen could not fulfill the contract due to health reasons. The fire department equipment, which will replace the exhaust system for vehicles that operate within the fire hall. That project was put on hold as the source had supply issues getting the new exhaust system into their possession so they can install it. So that needed to be deferred to 2022. So both those projects are part covered by the regional district as per our shared services agreement for fire protection in the regional district, and 2/3 of that project are covered by taxation purposes. So that is our capital plan for 2022. Any comments or questions can be directed to finance. That was the contact information at the beginning of the presentation. Schedule D deals with, so when we make a budget, our budget is based on cash purposes. So the revenue we receive in money subtracted from our expenses that we expect through the year creates a cash surplus. Doesn't create a cash deficit, otherwise that's not allowed under the community charter. However, our accounting books and all our measurements, several of our measurements we make to the province Also, under accounting standards, we present our books under an accrual method. So essentially what that means is that anything that substantially happens within 2022 is booked as a 2022 expense. There are several projects that they get billed right at the end of 2021 and get paid in 2022. Likewise, we do several jobs in 2022 that may get paid in 2023. So we also book what we call amortization. So when we do a capital project that benefits us for years and years and years in perpetuity, again, those don't get booked under expenses, under our operational side of things, and it's not really a cash expense, but we do book a cost every year to recognize the fact that the water, sewer, roads, and such won't last forever, so their value of those assets will decrease year after year after year. So they're not put in the budget; they are put in as an adjustment under Schedule D, and they're listed here for your perusal in 2022. The other thing that's in Schedule D is the planned transfers to and from reserves. They're also located in Schedule B, but this breaks out between what should get transferred to the reserve and what should get pulled from reserves in the current fiscal year. Note that it still adds up to $246,000, which was what was listed as our difference in Schedule B. And Schedule E is our permissive tax exemption policy. This was updated last in 2019. You see right there where we removed a couple of things. It was more cleanup in 2019 for the permissive tax exemptions. A permissive tax exemption is granted to an organization for mostly nonprofit organizations, actually all nonprofit organizations that own property within the municipality can apply to have their properties exempt from property taxation. It's mostly nonprofit businesses. There's also churches, places of worship can apply for this as well. The buildings themselves are exempt from taxation by legislation. However, if they have a parking lot, if they have a green space, if they have something next to their building, that is subject to taxation unless a permissive tax exemption is granted. So these come up. Applications have to be made by July 31st. That's right there. And they get submitted to BC Assessment, approved by Council, and submitted to BC Assessment by September 30th of each year. And that's our bylaw. So if you have any questions on anything that was included in the bylaw, please feel free to respond back to us. So we move on to the expense portion of our financial plan. So the expenses are we have a couple of pie charts coming up that kind of show each department in how they expend funds and where the funding is going. This is an example of the general government slide, so I'll just kind of explain sort of how each one of these are set up. So the sources of funds here are, we'll describe sort of where the money comes from to fund each one of the departments. Some are done more by sales and service, some are done by taxation, some are done by grant funding. They're all listed there as to where the source of funds are coming from. The line items, each department uses different sets of line items for labor and for their subcontractors for ease of tracking expenditures. So what the funds are used for will be under the line items. And if there are any major changes that are noted, that's also noted in the slide. So we will move right along here if I can. Oh, there we go. Okay. understand how this program works sometimes, but we'll get there. So, expenses. So this pie chart explains largely what percentage of each part of the municipal budget is devoted to each department. Share of expenses of different budgetary departments. That's a good way of putting it. I should just read the slide sometimes. The measure of taxes in the municipality. We'll go over this a little bit more when we get to the revenue side of our budget presentation, but essentially a town, according to BC assessment and their completed roll, the average cost of the average value of a home within town limits of a property with an improvement on it is $337,085. So using current estimated tax numbers, that $337,000 home would have $1,057.07 of tax in 2021. So using the same figures this year, that tax bill would be measured at $858.17, which you might scratch your head and think, how is that possible that taxes go down $150 on a house over last year? And the reason is that the value has increased. So the section of pie that has to be devoted to each individual house has diminished. If you increase the total value of something, the ratio between your house and everybody's house has decreased if the value stays the same. So that's why the bill falls significantly. The average increase in property in Princeton this year is approximately 36%. So it's a significant decrease over what it was last year. So the pie gives certain information here. So I'll quickly kind of review what's going on here. So the first number here, I'll use Parks and Recreation as an example. That number explains the share of the $858.17 that's being devoted to Parks and Recreation. So if your house was $337,085, your total tax bill would be $858.17, and the total amount of that $858.17 that would be used to fund Parks and Recreation would be $152.26. So that's how we come up with that number. The total value of the budget is right there. So the Parks and Recreation budget this year for the municipality in Princeton will be $1.231 million. And that represents 12.3% of all expenditures within the municipality. It's also important to note that there are several departments that have $0 implications to this budget. It's because these three in particular, water and sewer, are fully funded by utility fees, and flood mitigation should largely be covered by the provincial government. So the cost to taxpayers of these two departments is $0. So that's why those are measured at $0. The rest of them all have a cost attached. And it's important to note, and I always like to point this out to people, is that 70% of all municipal operational expenses are public works, leisure services, waste management, water, and sewer services. So if we move water and sewer to and from your house, roads and public works, where we play, and we take out the garbage, is 70% of our expenses. So it's important to note that, because we really try very hard not to be wasteful with taxpayers' money, and really we want to try and maintain as much money in your pocket and only deliver services that are really valuable to our community. So on with the pie charts here. The first one we have up is general government. So there's certain sale of services that are spent on certain services that are sold as a professional service. So so development is usually borne by developers. So that development, those development costs are borne by developers. That's our sales and service. Taxation is largely used for most other things when it comes to general government. There is some admin staff that are being added to our growing municipality. The extra labor cost shouldn't be too much more than it was last year, as there was extra OT costs that were borne from the province for these overtime rates, and they will be they won't significantly increase, but the overtime costs will have to be borne by the municipality as an extra additional staff member in town hall. It's also important to note that this is an election year, so the municipality is responsible for elections. So that's a cost this year. There's a possibility that the school district could cost share with us over the elections if there is a school district election that comes on board. Discretionary grants. So municipal taxation pays for discretionary grants. It's divided into two portions. Our grant and aid project assists nonprofits in various sectors of the nonprofit world. So support for vulnerable residents, sports programs, arts programs, any nonprofit that sort of benefits the municipality as a whole are eligible for grant and aids for a couple of years to get them started until they can kind of proceed as a self-funded entity. Facade improvement is a grant provided for downtown businesses to improve their frontage faced onto either Bridge Street or Vermilion Avenue, and we provide up to $5,000 of funding to support that project. The one part of the pie that's not on this is flood grants. We are administering the flood program from the Community Foundation of the South Okanagan-Similkameen, and that's also part of the discretionary grant program. It's a flow-through, so every dollar that we receive from the Community Foundation of South Okanagan-Similkameen goes out as an expenditure on the other side. But as was displayed, the funding will be 1 year only. It's expected to be 1 year only, and back to this chart in 2023. Protective services. So this is essentially our fire department with one addition. Protective services are largely municipal taxation. There is a cost-sharing agreement with the regional district. We cover up to 7 kilometers outside our town boundaries into the regional district for fire protection for rural areas as well. And the regional district provides funds for that area. Also, the Wild Safe program is being cost-shared this year with the regional district. So traditionally, the municipality has borne that entire $8,000 cost. This will be cost-shared with the regional district as well. Okay. So that's where that is. Emergency program. So the emergency program covers our provincial or our emergency operations center, emergency social services, keeps them maintained at a basic level for deployment when we have a disaster within town boundaries. Also covers our Fire Smart program. So the Fire Smart program is 100% covered through grants provided through the Fire Chiefs Association of BC, which is funded through the provincial government. and municipal taxation covers the minimal costs for the emergency program maintenance. Restorative justice is budgeted by the municipality. We were provided a grant annually from the province for restorative justice, but the municipality's only portion in Princeton is to collect that funding and forward it on to the restorative justice coordinator, who's located in Penticton. So really, it's a flow-through cost for us. BC Transit. So the town of Princeton provides a paratransit service in partnership with the Princeton and District Community Services Society. BC Transit is funded by municipal taxation. It's also funded through selling of transit fares. And there are partial grants that we receive from the regional district to service rural areas of Princeton, rural districts of Karameas, and rural districts all the way to Penticton. We also receive a small amount of funding from the village of Karameas to provide a bus stop there, and we're provided a grant from the Interior Health Authority to assist with funding of BC Transit to get people from Princeton to the hospital in Penticton. So all the funding that we receive from transit goes back to BC Transit that pays the expenses as necessary. Economic development. So economic development is funded through municipal taxation. Some capital funding is provided through the industrial park, land sales, and if there is recovery funding or funding in general available, capital projects can be also done through taxation or through grant funding from the federal government. Line items. So promotion and tourism strategy of Princeton is in general to use promotional items to encourage businesses and tourism to come to Princeton, set up jobs, and be tourists in our municipality accordingly. Conferences. So Princeton participates in some trade shows and some regional economic development conferences that's covered in our budget. We're members of the Similkameen Valley Planning Society, who, in addition with Karameas and the regional district, help promote the Similkameen Valley as a tourism destination. And we'll see this term in a couple of different budgets, administrative support. So our administrative budget that we use at Town Hall, a lot of those functions are rolled up as a number and distributed to their individual departments as a cost. That way it's better understood which department and how big they become with the administrative support they use from other sectors of the municipal operation. Visitor Information Center. So we have a Visitor Information Center downtown. The sources of funds, we're provided an annual operating grant from Destination BC. There's also a gift shop that operates at our Visitor Center that provides some basic valuation, but still a good source of good solid source of funding for the Visitor Center is provided through municipal taxation. Public Works. So Public Works is most likely our biggest spender of funds. It is our biggest spender of funds. It spends for our operational budget usually between 25 and 40% of our municipal budget each year. The sources of funds for public works are typically through municipal taxation for operations. With a small portion of billable funds, we really shy away from doing public works on private lands. However, in certain limited and exigent circumstances, we will do work to private lands and bill the project as per our fees and charges bylaw. The capital budget is funded through some taxation, some reserves, and but mostly we try and grant fund it through gas tax and through infrastructure grants that become available throughout each year. So our budget is broken down into these line items. I won't review them all. That'll make this presentation even longer than it is. There's some of the bigger ones off the start. General wages are huge, obviously. So for wages paid for public works for all functions. There's vehicles that need to be maintained. Public works supplies and maintenance, or fleet maintenance programs. Basic road repairs. Obviously, if it's major road repairs, those become capital item. But pothole repair and minor crack fixes and such are operational expenses. Basic sidewalk repairs, storm drain cleaning, snow and ice clearing, bridge repairs, street lighting. All these are fairly self-explanatory. Street sign repair, line marking for roads as well. Our municipal buildings. So we have each building has a maintenance budget attached to it. Any buildings that aren't covered under the four that are listed, four that are listed, become under the other municipal buildings portion. So here's the pie chart that breaks down all the expenses. My apologies for the cluttered look toward the top of the screen. However, I really am limited by what Excel will kind of allow me to do, or PowerPoint will allow me to do with a pie chart in this program. But as you see, we have about 42% of our public works are wages, and that leaves about 58% or so for subcontractors of materials. This is a fairly good ratio. 50-50 is probably the benchmark. Half wages, half labor subcontractors. Anything more than that, and the wages are starting to become too much of the overall budget. Much less than 40% probably reflects a labor shortage in the Public Works Department, and also needs to be addressed. But I think we're in pretty good shape when it comes to the ratio of expenses in the Public Works Department. I also noticed that one of the line items that are added are loan repayments. So for the capital works, the vehicles that Public Works are planning to replace, the 5-year expenditure will need to be repaid. That's part of that, and if there are any $7 million, well, that's what occurred under water and sewer, so that will be covered for the capital replacement if it comes to bear and doesn't come under the insurance portion. It's kind of doubtful whether we'll be able to get the replacements that we need for the aged equipment. We're probably more shifting toward what was destroyed in the flood through insurance, just because we have a sheer volume of vehicles that we need to get, and vehicles are very difficult to come by at any price at this point due to the semiconductor shortage and supply chain issues. Airport budget. So the airport is largely paid for by municipal taxation. We have a very, very small leasing program for people to store airplanes at the airport, but really there's not much revenue that's generated. Oh, and obviously fuel sales are a huge generator of funds. but that's a sale of service, but the actual maintenance and utility budgets are covered by municipal taxation. Parks, supplies and maintenance for parks, covered under municipal taxation. There's a very small component of sales of service when it comes to renting out parks, but yeah, it's under the public works budget. Waste management. So this is where we collect funds for landfill operations, for a recycling program, and for collection of garbage and recycling. So sales of services are collected through landfill tipping fees. We also sell our recycling back to Recycle BC and and 2 or 3 other corporations that do composting and take some of our renewable recycling for consumption and reuse, metal recycling, for example. We also have a cost sharing agreement with the regional district. So our operating deficit for the landfill is subsidized. In exchange, we allow the regional district use of our landfill at 0 cost for their garbage. That's the garbage tags and things they use to take their garbage off the landfill. And any difference that's left over from these amounts is billed to municipal taxation. The only line item that I would point out is the landfill closure accrual. So that is decided based on interest rates and is mandated by both accounting rules and the Ministry of the Environment, as when the landfill does close, and it's not slated to close with current usage until probably the 2070s, we are responsible for mitigating that landfill and results of liability on our financial statements. So that's why that landfill reserve is included in our budget as an operating cost. Princeton Cemetery. So most of the cemetery maintenance is covered under municipal taxation for the upkeep of the grounds. The rest of the cemetery, liners, sites, settings, public works time, is done to as a sale of service. So individuals buy plots and buy settings and buy preparation and buy public works time to have their services provided. It does fluctuate because it is a sales of service. So if less people buy cemetery services, the overall budget goes down and the maintenance budget is a higher percentage. And the opposite happens if we have lots of people who buy cemetery services, then it becomes more of a sale of service category and the maintenance budget shrinks as a percentage. Recreation and leisure services. So again, a large budget. We tend to divide recreation and leisure services, or Parks and Rec, as we're thinking about transitioning the name to. The source of funds are municipal taxation, and there is a cost-sharing agreement with the regional district. The capital budget is through several different sources. Obviously, we have a grant for the arena for improvements. Regional district does have a capital cost-sharing agreement as well. But if these two aren't adequate, then it becomes a general taxation valuation. So line items. So our capital items, we have, this is obviously last year's, but the Second Bench Hillside Trail, roof for the concession at Memorial Park, the arena roof would be covered under capital items as we reviewed in Schedule C. Our line items cover the municipal campground, civic celebrations, includes a stipend for the PXA for repairs and maintenance. It covers recreation programs through the Parks and Recreation Department. And then it largely splits the budget into facilities. So we have a set of line items for the pool, a set of line items for the arena, and a set of line items for the operation of the Riverside Center. We have now 4 line items in our recreational leisure services budget for perpetual grants for organizations that provide substantial benefit to the community. Those 4 line items are a operating grant for the Princeton Posse Junior B Club. There's an operating line item for the Princeton District Museum. There is a line item for the Princeton Community Arts Council. And there is also a line item for the Halloween Family Fun Night, including fireworks show. So those organizations are no longer covered under the grant and aid program. They do not have to apply annually for a grant and aid. They are supplied under a line item which is subject to review from council, but it doesn't come with the paperwork burden that the grant and aid program does, and also doesn't apply for the ability to prove that the grant is not the self-sufficiency category dissolves as well, being added as a line item. So it becomes part of an expectation to that the municipality assist these nonprofits to be able to operate with municipal funding. So there is our recreation budgets. You'll notice the 2 new line items, Halloween Family Fun Night and the Arts Council are up there. You notice that the rest of it, arena is kind of here. We have Riverside Center here. We have recreation programming here. Pool is kind of right here, and then there's more civic celebrations in the campground, and the exhibition grounds are kind of here. So there is that. There aren't a lot of significant changes to the recreation budget. If you have any questions, do let us know. The water budget. So the source of funds shift from municipal taxation. So water is strictly funded through the billing of utilities. The water budget is what we typically find in a contractor's costing model: labor, materials, subcontractors, permits. There's a water testing budget, as the water has to be tested by Interior Health on a very regular basis. And permits and licenses, the cost to operate a water system with the permits and licensing from the province and the Interior Health Authority is substantial. Sewer. So the sewer, again, utility billing. There'll be some borrowed funds in the capital. Also with water, there'll be some borrowed funds, as was discussed for the major water and sewer upgrade plan that was approved by AEP last year. And we always try and seek grant funding through infrastructure programs to try and improve some of our systems through senior levels of government. Sewer tends to be based more as a function of location than as a function than a traditional contractor model. So we don't see labor and labor, subcontractors, and materials as much. We see more to repair the to maintain the Clear Jester at Westridge, to maintain the sewage treatment plant, to maintain the lift station, to maintain the sewer system in general, for engineering services, for sewer backups and such. So it would be nice if it were more activity-based. Might be a project for one day to convert it over, but traditionally this is how the sewer system has been priced. So that concludes the expense portion of our presentation. We'll go into revenue at this point. So revenues. So we've sort of explained the expense portion of it. The revenue side of it covers the sources of funds that we need to supply to the budget so that we come to a nonprofit situation. These are the sources of funds. This is also broken down in Schedule B. You may recall that when we went over just after the consolidated financial plan. You'll see that government grants are a huge portion, 60% of our current revenue plan for the municipality. Obviously, if these grants are not approved or we can't find matching funds for the 20%, and the government sticks to their guns and won't grant us the 20% that we need to kind of continue on with things, then a large portion of the capital plan will also not work, and the budget will naturally shrink. However, this is the financial plan moving forward. Interesting number here. We always calculate this number that if the government decided not to give us any grants to maintain the budget, usually this is in the neighborhood of 100 to 150%. We have to increase property tax to draw from. This year, because the government grants are such a large portion of our budget, that number has jumped to 822%, which is a staggering number, and also reiterates the fact that we certainly would not be doing our capital plan without significant assistance from senior levels of government. So our assumptions that kind of go into the revenue side of things, we always try and target a tax increase of approximately 5%. The 5% number largely comes in from the 3 and 2 ratio again. So 3% naturally covers our labor agreements, the materials and subcontractors. We kind of hope to keep to a 3 to 5% increase per year. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. As a municipality, as I said, our largest proportion of spending is public works. And when it comes to public works, it is we are at the mercy of contracting, and that's already expensive with a very high inflationary portion. If anyone's ever tried to build anything, they know exactly what I'm talking about. So with inflation becoming a larger and larger boogeyman in the room, that 5% assumption is becoming difficult to justify. It may need to increase in future financial plans. So not meaning to scare anyone, but that is the reality that we kind of live in at this moment. Either that 5% is going to have to be looked at, or we're going to have to start identifying certain places in the budget that we're going to have to pull back on services. Yeah, the 5% increase is not across the board. Many people are going to look at that and say, my tax bill is $2,000 a year. You're increasing it by 5%, so you're getting an extra $100, and will shake their fist at me because $100 is a lot of money. And if you do that every year for 10 years, we could go upwards of $1,000 in 10 years, and the math starts to click in your head. It is important to realize that the municipality only collects about 30 to 40% of an actual tax bill. Most of the funding that gets paid through property tax does not stay in the municipality. For example, School and police tax are collected by the provincial government. So the school district, 58, provides a requisition amount to the province. However, the funding for school tax goes into generalized revenue of the province, and then the requisitions get paid out of that general revenue to the school district. So there isn't necessarily a correlation between the school tax that's collected and the money that's submitted to the school district. A police tax is similar. So in a municipality under 5,000 people, police tax is collected by the province, and all policing functions are paid for by the Ministry of the Attorney General of British Columbia. But again, the police tax that we collect and remit to the province has no basis on what our RCMP detachment receives in Princeton. So keep in mind for those two, that's a strong correlation there as well. The BC Assessment Authority collects a levy that's submitted to them. The Municipal Finance Authority collects a levy, whether we use Municipal Finance Authority lending or not, and has no basis on whether we actually use our maximum amount or minimum amount or anywhere in between. The Municipal Finance Authority levy, it's important to note that it's usually calculated in thousandths of a cent per $1,000 of value. So usually that's the line item on there that's 2 or 3 cents for a typical residence, and for a business might be a couple of dimes a year. So it's not much, but it's there. The levy for the Okanagan Regional Library, so we can have a library that operates within a municipality. The Regional District of the RDOS, who provides services to the municipality. The largest service that the municipality pays for is 911 service. So we pay the Regional District for our 911 service, and they turn around and subcontract the 911 service to the Regional District of the Central Okanagan, who partners with the City of Kelowna to provide 911 service for large swaths of the Okanagan. So when you call 911, you're actually getting dispatch. It's based in Kelowna, and the whole thing is also operated from the Provincial 911 Center in Vancouver. So it's kind of complicated how the cost sharings and the splits start to move upwards in the system, but know that the largest portion that we pay for the Regional District is for the 911 service. And the Okanagan-Similkameen Regional Hospital District is in charge of capital works for our hospital systems in the South Okanagan. So they're responsible for the Penticton Regional Hospital and for the Princeton Hospital and for health centers in the smaller communities around. They collect a levy on behalf of them, and they provide significant capital funding to Interior Health to build these facilities. So their rates are all set by them. They're not set by the town of Princeton in any way, shape, or form. Essentially, they quote the numbers, and we plug them in and apply them to the property tax bill accordingly. So the 5% increase may be a large increase, may not be a large increase. So we really only control the municipal portion of our tax increase, and we are aiming for approximately 5% for the 2022 fiscal year. However, interestingly enough, and the last point that's on the slide, is that even though, because of the rapid rise in property values over the course of the last 5 years, regardless of the tax increase, we actually have the mill rate from 2017 all the way through to, will ultimately be this year, has gone down year over year over year since 2017, even with an increase. So if the value of your home does not change, you can see from 2017 the value of your municipal taxes actually goes down year over year. However, the average value has increased substantially since 2017, so the actual value of that home has still increased from 2010 to 2021. So you will notice that, the tax on the average house, $803. Yes, the tax bill may have been significantly higher than that, but that is because that is because of the increases in value. So municipal taxation, a couple more points. So the total tax base is estimated to increase by 7.66% this year over last year's budget. So that represents the 5% tax increase plus 2.66% contributed by what BC Assessment calls non-market change. So non-market change are houses that didn't exist last year that will exist this year due to inventory concerns. So if somebody builds a house, their value of their improvements last year was 0. The value of their improvements this year is obviously more than 0. So that portion is not calculated when we bring the rates over from last year to this year, but they are counted as taxation obviously in this year. So while the increase to taxes is only 5%, the increase to the amount of taxes that's collected in the municipality is 7.66. So development actually helps to calm tax increases by amounts, and this has been the case in the Lower Mainland for years. Their costs have ballooned, and yet their tax increases have stayed at 1 to 3%. The reason they're able to get away with that is because they have large non-market change rates that have happened over the course of the last 20 years. So the existing residents don't have huge tax increases, but the new development contributes a huge amount to their budgets every year. So one, I guess, positive reason for development, I suppose. So this slide, again, we're significantly behind in what we usually do with our budget. So so this slide is still relevant. It's not necessarily information that will benefit residents in March. It would be something that would benefit residents more in the end of the fiscal year in December, when this video would usually be released. But we'll still go through it. There's still some important information on this screen, especially for flood damage victims. So the BC Assessment information is usually released in January after what BC Assessment releases what they call the completed roll. So BC Assessment will issue 2 rolls a year. One will be the completed roll, which gets released just after the new year. That's where you get your form from. It gives you information on how to appeal your assessment, and yeah, that's the one that gets everyone sort of bothered with the whole system. After the appeals are issued, BC Assessment will issue what they call the revised roll at the end of March, and that's where we base our property taxes off the revised roll in March. So it's due to be released probably in the next 2 weeks, and then we'll be able to start some solid property tax calculations and be able to get some assumptions into the system for valuation of property tax coming up in, usually those go out in approximately May. If your assessment is unfairly high, call BC Assessment to discuss the value. There's the phone number, 866-825-8322. It is very, very important to call BC Assessment, even if you have flood damage. There is provisions under the Act to be able to adjust assessments downwards. It doesn't affect DFA applications. I inquired about that with DFA directly. So If your house is significantly damaged, the improvement portion of that can be reduced, not quite to zero, but to a very minimal amount, which will reduce the amount of value you have in your home temporarily, which will reduce the property taxes that you pay significantly. So to save that money, I would strongly suggest calling them as soon as possible at the number provided if you have substantial damage to your home. The class of your home also has a strong bearing on the taxes. So if you have a split home versus business, and a large part of the home is home and a small portion is a business, that can save money as well. So once the value of property is set, it cannot be changed easily outside the appeal window in January. And again, that's why this screen is more relevant if we release this video in December. But still have a phone call, still have a discussion. I'm not sure what they can help individual residents with at this point, but it's worth a phone call for sure. The last 3 points of the screen are sort of how to deal with property taxes when we get them, and very easy, simple tips and tricks to make the tax bill as low and as painless as possible. The first one, absolutely, I will highlight this in big, bright yellow here. Claim the homeowner's grant. It is amazing every year when we do our reconciliations I'll even circle it. When we do our reconciliations, how many people incur a 10% penalty of their homeowner grant values because they don't claim the homeowner grant? And common groups that do not claim the homeowner grant are more people whose mortgage company pays their mortgage. They think, oh boy, the mortgage company takes care of my property taxes and I don't have to do anything. It's not true. The homeowner grant must be claimed every year, and it must be claimed by the owner of that building. So please, 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 please claim the homeowner grant. The province maintains homeowner grants now. They're all online. So if you Google homeowner grant British Columbia, it'll link to the province's website. You fill in a couple of screens, and they are happy to process the homeowner grant application. It takes, if you have all the information in front of you, it takes less than 5 minutes. Homeowner grants in British Columbia are $770 for the basic grant, and $1,045 for what they call the additional grant. So the additional grant is valued at for seniors over 65, I believe. Could be 55. I'm not sure. It's in the legislation. Or disabled folks. There's a veterans allowance. There's about 3 or 4 different things that you'll get an additional grant for. But even the basic grant is quite generous, and you only have the current taxation year or the next taxation year to claim it, otherwise it's lost. And that really becomes several $100s that you don't get. To claim a homeowner grant, you must own your residence and you must live in your residence, and you can only claim one on your principal residence. So those points are important. If you meet those qualifications, please, 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 please apply for that homeowner grant, either online, or it can also be applied for through Service BC, which in Princeton is located at the corner of Highway 3 and Bridge Street in the mini mall. This is right beside between Valley First and the Cool Beans Coffee Shop, right in there. And they have all sorts of information, and they can do your homeowner grant right there on the spot in about 5 minutes. Do note that if you don't apply for the homeowner grant, or you apply for it after the tax penalty deadline, there can be a penalty attached to that amount, even if you claim the homeowner grant. So the amount is $37.50 or $77, depending on when you actually fail to claim the homeowner grant. So please, today, go online and claim that homeowner grant. The application process is already open, so please get it done and save yourself a couple of bucks. For persons who, even after claiming the homeowner grant, still are having trouble making property tax payment, the province does offer deferral programs. Under legislation, I have no authority to waive property taxes, waive penalties, waive interest. I have to bill them. It's a provincial responsibility, and literally I am breaking the law to waive penalties, interest, or property tax. They must be billed under the community charter. It's an offense not to bill them. So, deferral. So if it is difficult, if you're finding difficult to pay the property taxes as listed, you can apply for a deferral. You can talk to our office or visit Service BC down beside the coffee shop there again. So the province of British Columbia will extend a loan to seniors over 55 and families with children to pay the property tax of their principal residence at a very low rate of interest and not charge payments. So when you defer your taxes, let's say your taxes are $2,000, the $2,000 will be used to pay the property taxes. The province will essentially pay the property tax on your behalf, $2,000. They will charge at this rate 0.45% of interest per year. So that amounts to, on a $2,000 bill, amounts to probably $10 a year for that money. And they will not charge that money until you sell the home. So if you went to sell the home, the Crown would put a lien on the property title with the Land Titles Office, and you couldn't transfer the title until that debt is paid to the Crown. So with the proceeds of your home, you could pay off the province that money. So if that's an option, if that's of interest to you, please contact Town Hall or Service BC or the property deferral portion of the Ministry of Finance, and they'll be happy to let you know about that program. Other revenue sources the municipality uses: government grants. So that's from senior levels of government. They provide conditional and unconditional grants. Most grants are provided by the government are conditional grants for capital projects. So you have to undertake a specific task, build something, do something, jump through some hoops to be able to get that. The unconditional grant that the town receives is called the Small Community Grant. Essentially, we are granted several $100,000s a year to exist, and is used to support rural communities so that their taxes aren't significantly higher than urban centers. It costs a lot of money to bring in things into our municipality to encourage contractors to work here, and so on and so forth. And we're in a large urban center, has a much larger base to be able to pay for some of these things. So that's offset by that small community grant. Direct operating grants we get from the regional district. Some other local government agencies, Village of Karamias for transit, for example, or Interior Health, are used to offset operational expenses. Sales of service. So if we can find sales of service, some are very dependent on sales of service. We do not subsidize campgrounds. We do not subsidize developers. Some are sort of a cross between sales of service and municipal taxation, so they offset costs. Arena is an offset cost. User fees cover some portions, but some portions are still covered by municipal taxation to keep the arena going. Landfill, we don't bill enough to actually cover the cost of the landfill, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, other. There's investment income that we receive from bank accounts. We have an investment in the Community Forest Corporation, which provides us a dividend annually. Penalties and interest from unpaid property tax. So there are other sources of funds as well, but the three primary ones and the fourth one through municipal taxation have all been discussed. And reserve transfers and other schedules. So we reviewed that with the financial plan. So that is our budget presentation. Again, should you have any questions regarding the 2022 to 2026 financial plan, please submit emails to finance@princeton.ca. Written submissions can be done through through submitting them to Town Hall, or basic questions can be answered sometimes over the telephone. That's all I have to present today. I wish residents that were affected by the flood, all the speediest of recoveries, and hopefully this is an amazing town and an amazing community to live in, and hopefully we all get back up and running and have a great summer of enjoyment and back to our usual routines. So thank you very much, and have a good day.